Welcome to the deep dive. Here's a thought. Could something as, well, common as alcohol have actually been a major player in building human civilization? Like, in shaping the complex societies we see all around us. It sounds a bit wild, doesn't it? But that's exactly what we're getting into today. We're looking at the drunk hypothesis. It's this really intriguing idea that maybe our longstanding desire for intoxication wasn't some kind of evolutionary mistake, but actually offered, real cultural benefits throughout history. So for this deep dive, we're mainly drawing on a pretty fascinating recent study. It's cross-cultural research from the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology. And we're also pulling in historical records, scholarly debates, that sort of thing. Our goal here is basically to unpack this idea, see what the latest research says, understand the nuances. We'll look at how they tested it, because how do you test that, and what it really tells us about our past. Okay, so let's dig into this drunk hypothesis a bit more. People like Edward Slingerland have really championed this. The core idea is, essentially, that alcohol kind of loosens the reins on our cognitive control. And maybe that actually boosted things like creativity, thinking outside the box, lateral thinking. But maybe even more importantly, it might have made people more open to bonding, to cooperating, even learning from each other. Which, when you think about it, is pretty crucial for building anything complex on a large scale, right? Like tools, societies.
Right.
Oh, absolutely. And what's really striking is just how old this relationship is. Humans have been, well, getting drunk for millennia. It's not a new thing. You look at ancient Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, China, the Maya, the Inca alcohol. Wasn't just, there. It was woven into the fabric of life.
Yeah,
Take ancient Sumer, for example. Beer was absolutely central. They used it as offerings to their gods. They paid laborers with it for huge building projects.
Ate them in beer, really?
Yep. And the elites used it in feasts, big communal gatherings, to kind of build social bonds and, frankly, reinforce their own status. There's even this amazing bit in the Epic of Gilgamesh. You have Enkidu, this wild, almost animalistic man. And he's given beer specifically to become, and this is the phrase, truly civilized.
Wow.
It really highlights this ancient idea that alcohol could be like a tool for social transformation.
That story about Enkidu is powerful. Beer making someone civilized. But like you said, these are stories from societies that were already pretty complex. So the big question, I guess, is chicken or egg? Did the booze help build the complexity, or did complex societies just happen to like booze? How do researchers even begin to test that kind of huge historical claim quantitatively? The archaeological record must be, well, patchy.
That is exactly the challenge. And that's what this Max Planck Institute study by Vaclav Fričich and Angela Chira really tried to tackle head on. They used some pretty sophisticated methods, comparative ethnology, and something called causal inference.
Causal inference, so trying to figure out actual cause and effect.
Precisely. Trying to see if alcohol caused complexity or if other things were really pulling the strings. So they took a big global sample, 186 societies, mostly non-industrial, documented by ethnographers, mainly back in the 19th or early 20th century. And they looked specifically for the presence of indigenous traditional fermented beverages. Think mead, wine, traditional beers. Really importantly, they excluded high alcohol distilled spirits like vodka or whiskey. Those came later and have different social impacts. They focused just on these lower alcohol drinks.
Got it. Low alcohol, traditional stuff. And what did they measure on the other side? Complexity.
Exactly. They measured political complexity, which sounds fancy, but it basically means how many layers of authority or jurisdiction a society had. So ranging from what they call acephalous societies, basically no central leaders, all the way up to complex states with multiple administrative levels like chiefs, regional governors, a king,
Okay, that makes sense.
And the really clever part was using statistical models. They pulled data from huge databases like dplace to control for other big factors. Things like how intense their agriculture was, how productive the environment was, were they geographically close to complex neighbors, did they share common ancestors, all these things that could also drive complexity.
Right, trying to isolate the alcohol effect.
Exactly, to see what role alcohol itself played once you account for all that other stuff.
So what was the verdict after all that complex modeling? Did they find the link?
They did. They found a positive relationship. Societies with traditional fermented beverages did tend to have higher levels of political complexity. So on the surface, that supports the drunk hypothesis.
Okay. I sense a but coming.
You sense correctly. There's a very important but. While the link was there, the actual effect size of alcohol turned out to be, well, rather small once they controlled for all those confounding factors.
Smaller than expected.
Especially compared to agriculture. Agriculture seemed to be a much, much bigger driver of political complexity.
Ah, so agriculture was the main engine.
It looks that way based on this study. It kind of flips that old beer before bread idea.
Right, the theory that we started farming in order to make beer.
Yeah, this study suggests it was more often the other way around. Bread before beer. Agriculture came first, created the necessary surplus of grains, fruits, whatever. And that surplus then allowed for the regular large-scale production of alcohol. Alcohol production seems more like a consequence or maybe a facilitator enabled by agriculture rather than the primary cause of it.
That's a really significant finding. Changes the narrative quite a bit.
It really does. But even if the direct causal effect on creating complexity was modest, alcohol still played some interesting roles within these complex societies.
How so?
Well, think about it from the perspective of elites, the leaders. They could use alcohol strategically. Hosting big feasts with lots of drinking was a way to mobilize labor for big projects, makes tedious work more appealing, maybe?
Sure, I can see that. A work party is better than just work.
Exactly. It helped build alliances between groups, and it was definitely a way for elites to display their wealth and generosity, strengthening their power and authority. Centralized redistribution of alcohol, And on a social level, it did seem to foster bonding, build trust, maybe even spark some creativity needed for innovations. And don't underestimate the stress relief factor.
Mm-hmm.
Living in bigger, denser, more hierarchical societies probably wasn't always easy. Alcohol might have helped smooth some social friction.
Like a social lubricant, literally.
Pretty much. We see hints of this historically, like those work party feasts you mentioned, where sometimes the drink was the main draw, or accounts of Celtic and Germanic lords using these big drinking feasts to build loyalty and cohesion among their warriors before battle.
It paints a picture of alcohol being a useful tool historically. But obviously we know alcohol has a major dark side too. Did the study touch on that or the historical sources, the problems it caused?
Oh, absolutely. It wasn't all positive social bonding. The same sources that talk about cohesion also mention the downsides. Drinking could definitely fuel arguments, antagonism, social disruption. Some ethnographic accounts are quite vivid about feasts ending in quarrels or even violence. Henry saw this with the Quinang in Brazil, Goldman with the QPO in Colombia. Feasts could go either way.
Right, so it wasn't a magic bullet for social harmony.
Definitely not. But what seems crucial is the cultural context. How well was drinking integrated into the society's norms and rituals? In many traditional societies, they had specific practices. Drinking was usually social, not solitary, maybe limited to certain times or festivals. And remember, we're talking low-alcohol beverages typically. In those contexts, it seems the social benefits often managed to outweigh the disruptive potential. There were cultural guardrails, if you like.
Which contrasts sharply with today, doesn't it?
Massively. That's a critical point the researchers make. There are studies about low-alcohol drinks in largely non-industrial settings with strong social controls. Today, we have virtually unlimited access. Super high alcohol distilled spirits are common, and solitary drinking is widespread. Those traditional guardrails are mostly gone.
Yeah.
So, in our modern world, the equation flips. The potential dangers, addiction, health problems, social disorder often vastly outweigh any potential social benefits. You mentioned the global death toll earlier. It's staggering. It really is a stark difference. Okay, so this study is fascinating, but like any research, especially on such a huge, complex topic, I assume it has limitations. What are the things we still don't know for sure?
Yeah, the authors are quite upfront about the limitations, which is good science.
Yeah.
First, there's always the possibility they missed some important confounding factor that wasn't in the literature they reviewed, something else that explains both alcohol use and complexity. There could also be measurement errors in some of the data they used, although they were careful with the alcohol coding.
A big one, methodologically, is that the specific statistical models they use, these DARIGs, mostly assume causality flows in one direction.
Ah, so A causes B, but not B causes A.
Right. But in reality, it's plausible that alcohol use and political complexity could influence each other back and forth. Or agriculture and complexity might be more of a feedback loop.
That makes sense. Things are rarely simple one-way streets in history.
Exactly. And because they use cross-sectional data like a snapshot in time from those ethnographic records, it's hard to say definitively if alcohol helped societies become complex initially or if it mainly helped maintain complexity once it was established.
So cause versus maintenance.
Yeah, it probably varied. And finally, they stress alcohol is just one piece of the puzzle. Many other things help build complex societies: music, dance, shared rituals, common religious beliefs. These all serve similar functions in binding people together and enabling cooperation. Alcohol wasn't acting alone.
Right, it's part of a whole toolkit of cultural technologies.
Precisely.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. Bringing it all together, what's the main takeaway here? It sounds like this deep dive shows alcohol, yes, it probably did play a role, positive one even, in the rise of complex societies. But maybe not the starring role some theories suggested. It was more of a facilitator, a lubricant, perhaps. And agriculture seems to be the more fundamental driver, kind of setting the stage by providing the necessary resources, the surplus fermentables.
I think it's a very good summary. It's a more nuanced picture. Alcohol mattered, but it was intertwined with other factors, especially agriculture. It wasn't the magic ingredient, but it was often part of the recipe for social complexity. And it leaves us with a really interesting thought, doesn't it? If alcohol's social pluses could outweigh its minuses in those specific historical contexts, low alcohol, culturally integrated social drinking, what does it tell us about how we should think about alcohol's role today in our world with its very different types of alcohol, its different patterns of use, and maybe fewer of those traditional social controls? What stands out to you when you consider that long, complex history between alcohol and human civilization?